Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, coming at you with a guide for Baldur's Gate 3. This time revisiting my older builds and updating them with current patches for Honor Mode. Today, we'll be going over the notorious Lockadin build, or the Paladin Warlock multiclass, combining the Paladin's solid chassis with the Warlock's invocations and Pact of the Blade makes the Lockadin able to focus solely on charisma and still be a rather formidable martial character, perhaps even more so. In this updated guide, we'll be going over the various ways you can build it, gameplay strategies, items, and even a leveling guide. But fear not, we will have timestamps below to skip to what is relevant to you. Let's just get right into it, shall we? So first and foremost, the purpose of this guide is to showcase the synergies of this build, and isn't the end-all, be-all of Paladin Warlock multiclass builds. Surely there's something out there that can do XYZ slightly better. We'll be going over a brief rundown of the build and front-load the updated information. And you can stick around to hear the explanations if you desire. Alright, for reals now, let's get right into it, shall we? So previously, the build was 7 levels of Paladin with 5 levels of Warlock, since there was a little bit of a cheesy mechanic that allowed the Pact of the Blade at level 5 to grant you an additional attack that stacks with the martial version of the extra attack feature, giving you a total of 3 attacks, similarly to a level 11 fighter. That is no longer the case anymore due to some of the Honor Mode patches, so you can no longer have that extra attack in Tactician or Honor Mode. But that's totally fine. We can still do quite a good amount of damage with only those 2 attacks, and you can still decide to have 5 levels of Warlock if you desire. But we don't have to anymore. So this opens up a lot of different build combinations. Whether you still stick to the 7 levels of Paladin and 5 levels of Warlock to get those 3rd level Warlock spells, or perhaps you decide to now pick up an extra feat by going 8 levels of Paladin and 4 levels of Warlock. Or dropping down to 3 levels of Warlock so you still get Pact of the Blade and the charisma based attacks, and substitute those 2 levels of Warlock with 2 levels of Fighter. So now you have all your Paladin aura abilities that you desired, your charisma based attacks from Warlock and the invocations that they provide as well, and on top of that you'll have Action Surge and Second Wind from Fighter. This is probably going to be the more standard version of the build, and we'll go more in depth later in the video as to different alterations you can choose as well. So not only do I like to optimize mechanics in D&D, I also like to optimize flavor, so to speak. An example would be picking the Archfey Warlock Patron with the Oath of the Ancients Paladin. It just makes sense to me. Have a Patron of the Fae and also, fight for the forests. So we'll be all going over the different variants as well, which subclasses to pick, what they offer, how they mingle with each other, and there's a lot of really good combinations here. This is a bit longer for a quick intro than I would have liked, so we'll just go ahead and say you don't need 5 levels of Warlock anymore, 3 will suffice. You can obviously go more if you desire, it all depends on what you want. But if you're just looking for a quick and easy build, 7 levels of Paladin, 2 levels of Fighter, and 3 levels of Warlock. So you begin with 1 level of Paladin just to get your heavy armor. Maybe you might want to get that to level 5 as soon as possible to get your extra attack, or you could decide to pick up your at least a level of Warlock just so you can get both of your flavor options right away. And then by level 6 you'll have level 5 of Paladin. Again, it's all up to you. And to wrap it up here, if you enjoyed this update and quick explanation, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and feel free to stick around for the full explanation of the build. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Alright, so for origin options, I still believe Lae'zel, Will, and the Dark Urge, or Tab of course, to be the better options for the build. I do also think that Minthara makes a fantastic candidate for this build as well. The reason being that there are really great mechanics for all of these characters, and also a lot of flavor reasons why each of these builds make a lot of sense. Will is overall a pretty good doer, and he already starts off as a Warlock, so that's already half the build right there. He makes a natural fit for a Paladin based on his personality. Lae'zel makes sense to me as well, since she has a very high code of honor, and does not try to stray too far from her beliefs. I think she makes a much better Paladin rather than a fighter, especially in service to Vlaakith, if you go that route. And of course, you can also make Vlaakith your Warlock patron in your headcanon. Makes sense to me. The Dark Urge is just a natural fit for any character since it's fully customizable, same with Tav, and we'll go over some racial options to choose from in a bit. And then Minthara is just fantastic since she's already a paladin anyways, and we'll go over her in a little bit. But again, we're going to keep this all spoiler free as best as possible for those who still have yet to play the game. Anyways, so moving on. So for racial options, should you decide to play the Dark Urge or your own custom Tav, there are plenty of races to choose from that are fantastic. Ultimately, at the end of the day, pick whatever you want. It's not going to make or break this character. However, there are plenty of perks for picking certain races. If you notice by now, I tend to pretty much favor all the Underdark races, being Dwergar, Drow, or even the Deep Gnomes. They're all fantastic. They get a lot of really cool abilities, a lot of extra spells, things of that nature. That being said, I think, especially if you go for a certain build, I think the Half-Orc to be the best out of the potential racial options should you decide to go this route, since they have the extra crit damage on their melee attacks. That, and I'm just a very big Half-Orc enjoyer. So yeah, my vote is either for Half-Orc, Drow, Dwergar, really anything. Ultimately, play what you want. At the end of the day, it's your game, not mine. Okay, so now that we picked our race, which type of paladin do we want to be? So, no matter what type of paladin you pick, you're going to have a really good class. In my opinion, paladins are one of the stronger D&D classes since they just have a lot of amazing features. You get heavy armor, you get all kinds of cool spells, and probably the best spell in the game, Smite. Even though it's not technically a spell, but you know what it is. Anyways, Oath of the Ancients is probably one of the stronger ones from a supportive role. You get an incredible healing ability called Healing Radiance, which scales off of your paladin level, as well as your charisma and your proficiency bonus. Healing in Baldur's Gate 3 isn't the most important thing in the game, since you're effectively just as strong at 1 HP versus a million. You're still capable of fighting. So really all you need is a quick pick-me-up, which is why spells like Healing Word is so effective, since it's a bonus action. Now, this ability, Healing Radiance, is also a bonus action, and it's a bit of an aura. Anything around you within 3 meters will be healed initially on this turn and at the start of next turn, which makes this ability really good for certain encounters that you're going to be taking a lot of damage, such as the Grim in the Grimforge encounter, with all that lava and just high damage coming out on certain bosses. And then they have a few other decent abilities. Their level 3 Oath abilities are just okay. Personally, I think this level 1 ability is a lot better. And their level 7 aura is fantastic as well. Getting resistance to magic damage all around is amazing. To maintain the Oath of the Ancients, all you gotta do is be kind when you can, punish evil beings, and enjoy life, enjoy nature. It's not that hard to keep. It's a lot less strict than the Oath of Devotion, and it's a lot more freeing, so it's pretty easy to follow. It's not hard to break. Oath of Devotion, on the other hand, is still pretty bad. It's just very bland, and you don't really get anything special in terms of spells. Your level 1 feature is very blech, because you don't want to take damage. And this also, the damage doesn't really scale, so there's really no point in using it. It's just not a very good subclass, but that's always been the case in 5th edition. But even if you're not getting any fancy spells, you weren't going to be using those spells to cast anything anyways. Let's be real. We're going to be using those to smite things. So if you want to be the quintessential paladin, the do-gooder, or, Superman, the Oath of Devotion is for you. Do the right thing, punish the unjust, you'll be fine. Moving on to Oath of Vengeance, this is probably the strongest of the normal oaths. The Oath of Vengeance is notorious in 5th edition as the boss killer, as one of your oath features at level 3 is called Vow of Enmity, which gives you advantage on a certain target. And luckily, in Baldur's Gate 3, you could use this oath on yourself, meaning you have advantage on any attack for the next 10 turns. This is huge. So their level 1 feature is actually pretty solid. You or an ally's weapon attacks will deal an additional damage for each hit. And it does scale, actually. So this is a pretty nice ability. It's just another damage rider. Typically, you're going to want to cast this on, say, somebody like a monk or a ranger or really anything that has multiple attacks. So it can be quite useful. But really, Vow of Enmity is the reason why we would pick Oath of Vengeance. Not to mention, they have easily the best outfit starting off. Like, come on, look at that. Yeah, Oath of Vengeance is definitely the way to go. And then there's also another oath available to us in Baldur's Gate 3 on by default, and that is the Oathbreaker. Oathbreaker is very solid. They get some pretty cool spells. Their oath features are pretty solid too. And then the tenets of the Oath of Vengeance is pretty much beat the greater evil. No mercy for the wicked. So an example here, and a minor spoiler for Act 1, is the Hag. If you give her mercy as an Oath of Vengeance paladin, that's not the right thing to do. You need to slay her. However, I think if you do pass the intimidation check to take her hair and save the girl, I think you're okay. But ultimately, in that kind of situation, the Oath of Vengeance, you're basically Batman. Let's be real. So do things Batman would do, and you'll be just fine as an Oath of Vengeance paladin. Do not let the Joker get away. As far as your level 1 decision, it ultimately depends on what kind of build you want to go for, or what flavor, really. As mentioned before, the Oath of Ancients and the Fey Patron Warlock is a pretty solid bet to go with. Lots of good flavor there, lots of synergy, and the abilities work pretty well together as well. Oath of Vengeance Paladin with the Great Old One Warlock is a fantastic combo, since you'll be getting a lot of critical strikes with Oath of Vengeance thanks to having advantage a lot with your Vow of Enmity. And then on top it off with the Great Old One Warlock's feature to fear people when you crit things, combos very well. Perhaps we should actually look at the Warlock real quick just so you can see what the patrons look like. So the Fiend is probably one of my favorites. Just right off the bat, level 1 Fiend, you get a subclass feature. Whenever you kill a creature and get him down to 0 hit points, you'll be gaining an extra temporary hit points based on your charisma and your Warlock level. And depending on how many levels of Warlock you invest into it, you'll probably be getting about 5 to 10 HP per kill. And the temp HP doesn't stack, so it'll just refresh itself. This is pretty good throughout the course of the game. You also get some pretty nice spells, a lot of like offensive spells such as Burning Hands and Hellish Rebuke, which I think are only for the Fiend Warlock. Let me double check. Oh, Burning Hands is, but Hellish Rebuke we have it on anybody. Alright. Yeah, they got a lot of good fire spells, and it's a pretty solid Warlock to choose. And as mentioned before with the Great Old One, right here, whenever you get a critical hit, the creature must succeed a Wisdom saving throw or be frightened. And the frightened condition makes it so an enemy cannot move and also has disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. So it's kind of like a nice little pseudo CC there. Pretty sweet. As for spells, they get a lot of controlling things. Nothing too crazy, but really you would pick the Great Old One for that feature. And then the Archfey, or Archfey, however you want to pronounce it. We get Fey Presence. It's a nice little feature for free. You can charm or frighten nearby foes for 2 turns. Pretty sweet. Nothing crazy, but again, with your patron, you can decide to min-max if you desire, but I personally think you should go with flavor. All great choices. But for the purposes of this video, let's just go with the Vengeance Paladin and the Great Old One Warlock. So level 1, we'll be picking Paladin. For all your great features you start off with, we start off with heavy armor, and we'll go ahead and arrange our stats accordingly. So because we are going to be going with the Pact of the Blade with the Warlock, we're going to want to focus on Charisma being our strongest statistic. And because you can have the option to wear heavy armor from the get-go, Dexterity isn't all that important beyond Initiative. I like to have just a little bit of strength just because I like to carry a lot of crap, and well, that's pretty much it. Now, in terms of starting your Charisma at level 17 or 16, usually most of the time you'd go with 17 so you can pick up the Hag's Hair. But due to the way the Paladin oaths work, you might not always be able to guarantee that you can get the hair safely and maintain your oath. So it is totally fine if you decide to start with 16 Charisma, in which case I would invest that either the remaining points into Wisdom or upping your strength a bit even more so you can carry more crap. Because like I said, I like to hoard things. But again, it's ultimately up to you. So having a 17 charisma is totally fine as well, because we can always pick up some decent feats later. That can also increase our charisma. As for our starting skills as a paladin, we don't have too many options to pick from. And as you see here, we are started off as Dark Urge, so we already have Medicine and Intimidation. Persuasion's really good to have as a talking skill. Athletics is okay, it doesn't come up too often. I think it does affect your jump, but so does your strength. But I think Insight is a pretty decent feature to have, since we can potentially detect things when people are being shady. So ultimately, whatever stat spread you desire is going to be just fine, as long as you maximize your charisma to as high as you're comfortable with, and getting a decent enough constitution to help maintain spells and, just survive hits. And getting decent wisdom and intelligence is good as well for saving throws. I would favor wisdom over intelligence for this game. But again, I like to carry a lot of shit, so strength is always really high for me as well. And that is our level 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Minthara, and we're going to finish out the build on her. However, I wanted to go over the Oathbreaker first. So your level 1 feature you have as an Oathbreaker Paladin is called Spiteful Suffering. The target will take a little bit of necrotic damage each turn, and attack rolls against it have advantage. So this could be pretty sweet on using on a boss target to give all of your allies, or perhaps allied NPCs, advantage against a particular target, such as a boss or tougher enemy. So this works out pretty well if you have a lot of minions, or maybe you just have some hard hitters who can't get advantage on them by themselves. It only works on that target though, and it only lasts 3 turns, so hopefully you can kill it quick. You also have an AoE Fear from Dreadful Aspect, which makes you do a little AoE Frighten against everyone. Pretty sweet. But then we also have another sweet ability called Control Undead. This is one of my favorite abilities on tabletop, and you can have some pretty cool undead under your control with this. But you have to encounter it, and you have to succeed your controlling over it. In Baldur's Gate 3, there aren't too many undead that are worth taking. There are some, don't get me wrong, but they are far and few between. Some good notable options to grab would be things like the Death Shepherd, which you'll encounter in the early Act 2, or Act 1.5, whatever you want to call that mountain pass. There are some mummies and a few other decent undead foes you might encounter. And whenever you take a long rest, you will lose control of that undead, but fear not, as you can gain control of them again. And the Aura of Hate is the Oathbreaker's Aura, which will increase your Paladin, will increase the damage for you and any nearby fiends or undead that are wielding weapons. Unfortunately, every single undead that we can summon in this game does not wield a melee weapon. Your archers have bows, which are definitely weapons, but you can't obviously hit them in melee with those. Unfortunately, our aura doesn't affect any of our undead. If it did, it would make the Oathbreaker a lot stronger than the other options, especially if you're doing necromancy playthroughs. That being said, there are a few undead, as I mentioned before, like the Death Shepherd, who actually wield weapons and would benefit from this. This also says fiends, and several of the demons that you can summon do wield weapons, so it is not an entirely lost cause of an aura. And at the end of the day, it also increases your personal damage as well, so if you have a lot of ways to make an attack as your paladin, or perhaps you might dual wield or something to that effect, you can actually dish out a little bit extra damage from this aura. So, unfortunately, we can't not respec until we talk to our Oathbreaker, if I can find him on this playthrough. He's over... I don't remember where he is. I'll find him. Give me a second. Honestly, I wish there was like a little quest involved with this instead of just panning over money, but you can only get so much. Alright. Now we're back to being a paladin again. Now we don't have our aura anymore. We're now back to being a vengeance paladin. However, we're going to start again from level 1, just so you guys can keep track with the leveling guide. Starting level 1, we're going to pick our paladin again. Go ahead and invest our charisma to be as high as possible. Go ahead and increase our strength. Let's lower that. Get our wisdom up. Oops, wrong button. Yeah, that's not too bad. We'll go with that. I just like having a little bit of extra strength again, because I like to carry a lot of shit. Alright, so she already starts off with Perception, History, and Persuasion. So we'll go ahead and grab Insight instead of Athletics. And we'll keep Intimidation. We already have Intimidation. Do we? Yeah, we do. Okay. Alright, we'll start with that. Now, moving on to level 2. We can either continue our path to Paladin if you want to really rush to get that extra attack at level 5, which is totally viable. Go ahead. I personally, if I'm doing this as my main character, I would go with our Warlock and pick the Great Old One. The reason I want to get the Warlock right away is so we can get our Warlock dialogue options for the most part. Otherwise, going straight Paladin first and getting this level 6 is totally fine. It's up to you. I prefer flavor over function sometimes, so I'm going to go with the Warlock right away. As for our spells, I'm going to pick Friends just to get advantage on certain charisma checks, and then also having Eldritch Blast is always nice just to have a ranged option that's pretty powerful. As for our level 1 spells, if you're going to be playing a Paladin, Hex is definitely the way to go, and I also really like Arm of Agathis, because we're going to be up the front line and potentially taking damage, in which case we'll make them take damage too. So that will be our level 2. And then we're going to go level 3, we're going to go back to our Paladin. And we'll unlock our Smites and a fighting style. Now, it is completely up to you. There are plenty of good one-handers in the game, and there's plenty of good two-handers in the game. Or if you just want to have this be neutral all around and not restrict yourself to a particular weapon, you can just increase your armor class by 1. Otherwise, if you're going to be using a one-handed shield, dueling is definitely the way to go. But if you want to be an iconic Vengeance Paladin and using a pole arm or two-handed sword, then great weapon fighting is the way to go. Really, it's up to you. Again, if you don't want to restrict yourself to a weapon, pick up defense just so you get a flat +1 to AC, make yourself a little tankier. Protection's pretty decent too, but it's kind of niche in comparison to the other ones, and it will consume your reaction as opposed to using that reaction for something else. So you can't really go wrong with any of these options. They're all pretty good. But since we are playing as a Vengeance Paladin, and we will be using a two-handed polearm most likely, so we're going to go ahead and use Great Weapon Fighting. As for your spells, it doesn't really matter, since you can always change them on the fly. Having Heal is nice, having Bless is nice. You could have another Smite if you wanted to, but that's going to consume your bonus action and your action to cast both of those. Just pick whatever you desire. Shield of Faith's nice. Divine Favor, if you're going to use that in addition to your other ability to enhance one of your character's damage. Say you have a dual-wielding crossbow kind of person or a monk, you can really increase their damage by quite a lot. Command's always nice to cheese out some weapons or make some enemies drop their weapons or something to that effect. Do some soft CC. Heroism is pretty niche, but it can come into effect in certain situations to help negate fear. So really pick whatever you desire. That's our level 3. Moving on to character level 4, we are now Paladin level 3. And we get our Abjure Enemy. This is kind of like a CC ability. You'll frighten the enemy, and then which means they can't move, nor will, and they will also have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. And if they save on it, then they're slowed instead of frozen. But the real reason we are here is, again, is for Vow of Enmity. Now, as mentioned before, in 5th edition, Vow of Enmity, you pick a target, and that's the person you're killing. In Baldur's Gate 3, however, you can cast Vow of Enmity on yourself, and now you have advantage for 10 turns. It is a fantastic ability. And then we also have another great ability in Hunter's Mark. So you don't even need Hex from the Warlock to do this extra damage, since Hunter's Mark is essentially the same thing. And they do not stack, since they're both concentration spells. And then, again, pick whatever spells you want. You can always change them later for your Paladin spells. Alright, so now we're character level 5, but Paladin level 4, so we can pick up our feat. Clearly, you can always go with the stat increase, which is always a very noteworthy option, but Paladin loves feats. It loves Great Weapon Master to just do huge damage. It likes Polearm Master, again, to do huge damage. Since we can smite on each of these attacks, including the offhand attack, we can smite off of that as well, which is always nice. Not to mention that the Polearm Master really synergizes quite well with our level 7 Vengeance Paladin aura. Well, it's not really an aura, but our feature, I suppose you should say. And then there's also Actor, which will give us a +1 to Charisma to help even that out, and give us proficiency in Deception and Performance. But not only do we get proficiency in it, it's also expertise in addition to that, so that's pretty nice. That being said, we'll probably pick up Actor at a later time. For now, I really enjoy Great Weapon Master and Polearm. If you feel like you don't want to take that penalty to hit from Great Weapon Master, you can always toggle it off when you feel like you need that extra +5 to hit. Or if you just don't want to deal with that in general and you want to pick that up later as well, you can definitely go with Polearm Master, and you will not feel wanting. But I like to consistently hit harder, even at this -5 attack roll. So we're going to pick up Great Weapon Master, and there are plenty of ways for us to increase our attack to help negate that, which we'll go over in a moment when we get to the items. So I'm going to go with Great Weapon Master here. I'm a big sucker for it. Obviously, you can go with Polearm if you desire, or you can go with Actor if you want to increase your Charisma a bit. So at character level 6, we'll get our Paladin level 5. This will give us our extra attack, as well as level 2 Paladin spells, and Misty Step from Vengeance Paladin. The Oath of the Ancients also gets Misty Step at this level too, so both Oath of Ancients and Oath of Vengeance are fantastic. Misty Step is amazing, and it's even better in Baldur's Gate 3 with just how vertical this game is, so you can really get to some pretty sweet places or from further reach enemies, or even skip certain puzzles. And then Hold Portion's a pretty solid CC ability as well. And it's always prepared, so if you ever need the clutch CC or if you need Misty Step to jump around, you'll have something. Alright, now that we're at character level 7 and we have our extra attack, we can start going back into our Warlock. For Warlock spells, you can pick whatever you want. If you feel like you need a little bit of extra AoE sometimes, Armor of Dark is pretty solid. You can go with Hellish Rebuke, although it consumes your reaction, and it's only really more effective in the early stages of the game. Charm Person and some of these other crowd controls abilities are only really good in the early game as well. So I just like picking up Arms of Adar just to, I don't know, I like it. I think it looks cool. I also am a big sucker for necrotic damage. Anyways, moving on to our Eldritch Invocations. Obviously, Agonizing Blast will make your Eldritch Blast a very reliable range attack option if in the case that you can't get up there and smack them with your weapon. So we go ahead and pick that up. And then there are plenty of other options that are just as good. Repelling Blasts to make your Eldritch Blast into a pseudo CC and potentially knock people off of cliffs and whatnot can be quite useful. Being able to cast Bane for free is okay, but there's plenty of other ways to get that for free. One with the Shadows, I believe that is just casting invisibility as long as you're standing still. That can be okay, I suppose. I don't use it too often. Being able to cast Disguise Self on yourself is useful. However, most people will have the collector's version of Baldur's Gate, which will get you the Divinity Original Sin Mask, which lets you cast Disguise Self at will. Fiendish Vigor is not too great since False Life only increases your temporary hit points by 7, and there are plenty of ways to increase your temporary hit points. Devil's Sight is very good, and honestly, probably one of the options you'll probably consider taking. You'll negate blindness, and you can see through darkness, and both magical and non-magical. It's very nice to have. Beguiling Influence, you gain proficiency in Deception and Persuasion. We already have proficiency in Persuasion, and with the Actor feat, we'll be able to get expertise in Deception in addition to proficiency. So it's not entirely useful. Beast Speech will give you Speak with Animals, which is nice. Talking to animals is really good in any Larian game. However, there are plenty of other ways to get Speak with Animals, most notably with potions. And then last but not least, we have Armor of Shadows, which we can cast Mage Armor on ourselves without expanding a spell slot. But we'll be wearing armor most likely, so this is not as useful for us. So really, with this build, I think the options is obviously picking Agonizing Blast for one, and then you're either between Devil's Sight or Repelling Blast, whichever one you prefer. Devil's Sight's really good, especially if you decide to employ Darkness a lot often, or Hunger Havadar. And And then Repelling Blast, I just think it's just really fun at yeeting people off of cliffs or just, get them away off of whatever it is. Another cool thing about Repelling Blast is knocking them away. And then once you get Polearm Master, whenever anything walks in your melee range, you can just smack them. So it's just you kind of control the battlefield a little bit with Repelling Blast. So I'm probably going to go with that option. But Devil's Sight is really good as well. And at Warlock level 3, we get our level 2 spells. If you need a little bit more AoE, we can pick up Shatter. And then here's Darkness if you decide to go with the Devil's Sight. We got Cloud of Daggers for some AoE damage. And then we have a few more crowd controls and invisibility. Pick whatever you desire and what you feel like you might need the most. For our Pact boon, the choice here is Pact of the Blade. This will let you bind your weapon to you so you can't be disarmed. And then you can also use your spellcasting ability modifier as your attack stat. So before now, we weren't doing the most damage since we only had 12 strength. Of course, you could always respec at this point when you pick up the charisma. Or you could decide to get the 3 levels of Warlock early on in your playthrough, getting this as early as level 4. That's personally what I did in my game because I didn't really need that extra attack most of the time. So I didn't rush level 5 Paladin. I usually rush level 3 Warlock, but not everyone's like me. So this is probably the more standard version of the build. The rest of your team's going to have to carry you a little bit unless you decide to respec having strength, or perhaps using even a strength pot to negate having such a low strength to begin with. All those are viable options. There's no right or wrong way to play the game. As long as you're having fun, and more importantly in honor mode, as long as you're winning, that's also what matters too. So Pact of the Blade is the way to go, for sure. And then right here, you can't drop it, you can't throw it, and you can't be disarmed. And you also become proficient with it if you weren't already, so that's handy. But as a Paladin, we already have access to all weapons, so... Anyways, yeah, level 3 Warlock, Pact boon. So this is where we need to decide. Do we want to continue into Warlock and get our higher level Warlock spells? Or do we want to just get out of Warlock at this point and finish up our Paladin levels, or perhaps even pick up Fighter at this point? The choice is up to you. But just to keep it simple, we are going to just keep continuing our levels in the Paladin. At level 6, we'll get our Aura of Protection, where you and nearby allies will get an increase to your saving throw bonuses. Go ahead and take that. And then at level 7, Paladin, with our Vengeance Paladin, we get our Relentless Avenger. If you hit an enemy with an opportunity attack, your movement speed is increased by a decent amount on your next turn. This is an okay feature. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but it's nice to have, and it helps you get around the battlefield a little bit more. On tabletop, this lets you take an immediate movement turn, but unfortunately it does not work the same way in Baldur's Gate 3. But this combos really nicely either way with Polearm Master. So that's level 7 Paladin. Now, this is another turning point in our build. We can either decide to go to level 8 Paladin to get another feat. Same thing with Warlock level 4, we can get a feat. And honestly, this character is rather feat starved. So going with 8 levels of Paladin and 4 levels of Warlock is a very good way to go to help round off your stats, and also get your Polearm Master as well as Actor. But then if you really feel like you want to min-max a little bit more, you can go into Fighter. We already have great weapon fighting, so we can go ahead and grab Defense here, and then get our Second Wind or our Action Surge. All these are great options. You can't go wrong with no matter which way you pick. But if I were to pick, I would probably end up going with the Paladin level 8 and the Warlock level 4. And for the sake of the video, we'll just go ahead and pick up Actor at this point just to round up our Charisma to level 18. Unfortunately, on this particular playthrough, this one's only at level 11, and my level 12 would be getting to Warlock level 4 to get our other feat, either to increase our ability score or to pick up Polearm Master. Alright, and that's essentially the build. Now we can go over items to grab. There are plenty of really good items in the end game to look out for, such as the bonus to Charisma Hat to get that up to a potential of 22. So to avoid spoilers and other things of that nature, I'm not really going to focus on the end game items since there's a lot of really cool, powerful stuff, and there's a lot of cool things for you to explore there. We are going to go over some of the earlier game weapons. that will really enhance your early game playthrough, which in my opinion, this is more challenging and fun part of Baldur's Gate 3. So one of the strongest swords, one of the strongest early game swords in the game is called Svartal B's Woundseeker. This has an amazing feature called Deepen the Wound. The wielder will gain an additional 1d4 bonus to attack rolls with this weapon when attacking creatures that have already taken damage. So this is basically just an additional plus 1 to 4 bonus to hit. This is really useful to help negate that -5 penalty to Great Weapon Master. You can find this little puppy over at Joaquin's Rest. Particularly off of... oh, where is she? Is it this one? Yeah. Particularly off of Gauntlet Yeva. Now, this is a bit of a min-maxy type situation since all of these guards are friendly to you. And you need to kill her somehow. And as a paladin, you just happen to, stack a few explosive barrels next to her, and we are next to a giant fiery building after all. Accidents happen, right? 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 Anyways. And it wouldn't be a Remortis guide if I didn't talk about Valar Aluve. Probably one of the best swords in the game from a support's perspective. It's a longsword that has 2 abilities that you have to activate, which provide 2 auras. One called Shriek, which is a debuff upon enemies, and then another one called Sing, which is a buff to your allies. Yeah, of course, you have to choose between which one you want to use, and Shriek will cause enemies nearby to take a penalty to their saving throws and receive extra thunder damage whenever they are hit. This works on multiple attacks too, so things such as magic missiles will trigger thunder damage with each hit. But to help negate the penalty from Great Weapon Master, you might want to utilize Sing, which is more or less the opposite, which will cause all allies within 6 meters of the wielder to have a bonus to their attack rolls and their saving throws. So that's just an additional plus 1d4 to attacks. And that's not counting the Bless spell, which will do an additional 1d4 bonus to attacks. Those are just 2 weapons that you can find early on. Surely there are plenty of other weapons and items that you might want to look out for, but those, in my opinion, are the 2 best swords. Maybe not necessarily in the game, but for damn near a good portion of it. And alright, well, that more or less is the build. There are a lot of really great combinations you can go with your Paladin Warlock, whether it be with your Ancients Paladin and Fey Patron Warlock, or maybe you might decide to invest further into your Warlock side of things and just leave your Paladin level 5. Maybe you might decide to do 7 levels of Warlock and 5 Paladin. Maybe you might only want to do 3 levels of Paladin and the rest Warlock. It's all up to you at the end of the day. But at the very least, I hope this guide helped illuminate some things for you regarding this build, so that way you can make that decision on your own. And if you enjoyed this guide, of course, please like, comment, subscribe for more guides like these, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Farewell for now.